The morning sun cast golden rays through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Montgomery mansion, illuminating the marble floors that stretched endlessly through the estate. Montgomery stood in the center of her bedroom, her small fists clenched at her sides, her face flushed red with anger. At 12 years old, she had learned that screaming usually got her what she wanted. Her parents, Richard and Montgomery, were among the wealthiest people in the country, and their daughter had never heard the word no without it eventually turning into yes. "I don't want to go to that stupid charity event," shrieked, throwing her designer shoes across the room. They hit the wall with a thud, leaving a small mark on the expensive wallpaper. "I want to go to Jessica's party instead. Everyone will be there." Montgomery stood in the doorway, her perfectly manicured hand pressed against her temple. She wore a cream-colored suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and her diamond earrings caught the light as she sighed heavily. She had a board meeting in an hour and didn't have time for another one of her daughter's tantrums. "We've discussed this already," said, her voice strained with barely controlled frustration. "This charity gala is important for our family's reputation. The senator will be there along with several important business partners. You're expected to attend." Grabbed a crystal vase from her dresser and held it over her head. "I don't care about your stupid reputation. I hate you. I hate this family. I wish I was born into a normal family where people actually care about what I want." The vase went flying, shattering against the marble floor into 1,000 glittering pieces. Flinched but maintained her composure, though her jaw tightened. She had dealt with these outbursts before, but they seemed to be getting worse as grew older. The child therapists they had hired came and went, each one eventually admitting they couldn't break through walls of entitlement and anger. "Clean this up immediately," commanded, her voice cold. "And you will be ready in 2 hours wearing the dress I selected for you. This discussion is over." She turned on her heel and left, her expensive perfume lingering in the air. Screamed again, this time kicking over a chair and sweeping everything off her desk. Books, papers, and expensive electronics crashed to the floor. Her room, which resembled a luxury hotel suite more than a child's bedroom, was now in complete disarray. Downstairs in the mansion's commercial-grade kitchen, Grace Williams wiped down the marble countertops with steady, practiced movements. At 53 years old, she had worked for the Montgomery family for almost 3 years. Unlike the parade of nannies, tutors, and staff members who had come and gone, Grace had stayed, quietly doing her work and observing the chaos that seemed to follow the family wherever they went. Grace had raised 3 children of her own in a small apartment across town. Her eldest daughter was now a nurse, her son was studying engineering, and her youngest was a high school teacher. She had done it all on a modest income, working multiple jobs, sacrificing her own comfort so her children could have opportunities. When she looked at Montgomery, she didn't see a spoiled brat. She saw a lonely child drowning in material possessions but starving for genuine connection and guidance. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the mansion, followed by screams. Grace paused in her work, her dark eyes looking up toward the ceiling. She heard heels clicking rapidly down the marble staircase, and moments later the lady of the house appeared in the kitchen, her face tight with stress. Grace has made another mess in her room, said curtly, already pulling out her phone to check her messages. Please clean it up before the event this afternoon, and see if you can talk some sense into her. I don't have time for this nonsense today. Grace simply nodded, setting down her cleaning cloth. She had learned early on that the Montgomerys gave orders, not requests. She climbed the grand staircase, her sensible shoes making soft sounds on the marble steps. The walls were lined with expensive artwork and family portraits that looked more like professional magazine shoots than genuine family memories. When Grace reached room, she found the door partially open. She could hear the girl crying now, the anger having given way to tears. Grace knocked gently on the doorframe before entering. "Miss, may I come in?" Grace asked softly, her voice carrying a warmth that was rare in this cold mansion. "Go away," shouted, but her voice cracked with emotion. She was sitting on her bed now, surrounded by the destruction she had caused, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want anyone here, just leave me alone." Grace entered anyway, carefully stepping over the broken crystal. She began picking up the larger pieces, wrapping them in a cloth to dispose of safely. Watched her through tear-blurred eyes, expecting a lecture or a scolding, but Grace said nothing. She simply cleaned, her movements calm and unhurried. "Why don't you yell at me like everyone else does?" finally asked, her voice small and confused. Grace looked up at her, a gentle smile on her face. "What good would yelling do, sweetheart? You're already upset enough." Blinked, surprised by the kindness in Grace's voice. Most of the staff members either treated her with cold professionalism or obvious dislike. But Grace's eyes held something different. Understanding, maybe, or compassion. "I don't want to go to that stupid gala," said, her voice still defiant but softer now. "It's so boring and everyone just talks about money and business. Nobody actually cares about the charity or helping people. They just want to be seen and brag about how much they donated." Grace continued cleaning, but she listened carefully to every word. "That sounds frustrating," she said simply. "It's hard to be somewhere you don't want to be, especially when it feels fake." Stared at her. No adult had ever validated her feelings before. They always told her she was being difficult, ungrateful, or childish. But Grace simply acknowledged what she was feeling without judgment. "My mother doesn't care about me," continued, the words pouring out now. "She only cares about her image and her business. My father is always traveling. When they are home, they're on their phones or in meetings. The only time they want me around is when they need me to smile for photos or impress their friends." Grace sat down on the edge of the bed, a respectful distance from but close enough to show she was truly present. "That must be very lonely," she said quietly. His face crumpled and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Everyone thinks my life is perfect because we have money. But what good is money when you don't have anyone who really sees you? Sometimes I do these things, break things and yell just so someone will pay attention to me. Even if they're angry, at least they're looking at me." Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, offering it to. The girl took it hesitantly, dabbing at her eyes. It was a simple cotton handkerchief, probably bought from a discount store, nothing like the designer items that filled closets. but somehow it felt more real than anything else in her room. "I understand why you're angry," Grace said gently. "And I understand why you act out. But can I tell you something I learned when I was raising my own children?" Looked at her with curiosity. She realized she knew almost nothing about Grace's life outside of this mansion. "You have children." Grace's face lit up with pride. "I do. 3 beautiful children, all grown now, and let me tell you, they gave me their fair share of trouble when they were young. My youngest once threw such a tantrum in the grocery store that the manager asked us to leave." Almost smiled despite herself. She couldn't imagine the calm, composed Grace dealing with a screaming child in public. "What I learned," Grace continued, "is that anger is usually hiding something else underneath. Fear, hurt, sadness, loneliness. When my children acted out, I realized they weren't trying to be bad. They were trying to tell me something they didn't have the words for yet." Was quiet, absorbing these words. No one had ever explained it like that before. Her therapists had talked about emotional regulation and coping mechanisms, but it all felt clinical and distant. Grace was speaking to her like a real person, not a problem to be solved. "What was your daughter afraid of?" asked softly. "She was afraid I didn't love her," Grace said, her voice full of old pain. "I was working 3 jobs at the time, trying to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. I was gone so much that she thought I was avoiding her, that I didn't want to be around her. It broke my heart when I realized that." "Ah, but you were working to take care of them," said confused. "I was," Grace agreed. "But children don't always understand adult reasons. They just know what they feel. And my daughter felt abandoned, even though I was doing everything I could for her." Looked down at the handkerchief in her hands, thinking about this. "How did you fix it?" "I couldn't change how much I had to work," Grace said honestly. "But I changed how I was present when I was home. Instead of being distracted and tired, I made sure to really see my children. I asked about their days and actually listened to their answers. I made every moment count, even if there weren't many moments." "My parents are here," said bitterly. "They're just not really here." Grace nodded sadly. "I know, sweetheart, and that's not your fault, but I want you to understand something important. Breaking things and screaming might get their attention for a moment, but it's not getting you what you really need, is it?" She shook her head, more tears falling. "No, they just get mad and then ignore me more." "Exactly," Grace said gently. "Because you're not actually telling them what you need. You're showing them your anger, but not the hurt underneath it." "How am I supposed to tell them?" asked helplessly. "They don't listen." "That might be true," Grace acknowledged. "Some people have a hard time hearing what others need, especially when they're caught up in their own worlds. But there's something else you can do." "What?" "You can stop letting their behavior define how you see yourself," Grace said, her voice firm but kind. "Your parents' inability to show up for you emotionally doesn't mean you're not worthy of love and attention. It means they have their own struggles, their own limitations. But you have the power to decide who you want to be, regardless of how they treat you." Looked at her with wide eyes. She had never thought about it that way before. "I don't know how to do that." "It starts with choices," Grace said. "Small ones at first, like choosing to clean up this room yourself instead of leaving it for someone else, choosing to speak respectfully even when you're angry, choosing to find healthy ways to express your feelings instead of destructive ones. "But what if it doesn't matter?" asked, her voice breaking. "What if I change and they still don't care?" Grace reached out slowly, giving time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently placed her hand over the girl's. "Then you'll know you did the right thing anyway. You'll know you became a better person not for them, but for yourself. And that's a kind of strength that no one can take away from you." Looked down at Grace's hand covering hers. It was a working hand, with calluses and worn skin, so different from her mother's perfectly manicured hands that never touched anything rough or difficult. But there was something comforting about it, something real and solid. "I'm scared," whispered. "Of what, sweetheart?" "That if I stop being angry, I'll just be sad all the time instead." Grace's eyes filled with compassion. Sadness isn't something to be afraid of, it's just a feeling, and feelings pass. What you're really afraid of is feeling the sadness without the anger to protect you. The anger makes you feel powerful, even though it's actually making you miserable. Realized Grace was right. She had been using her anger like a shield, keeping everyone at a distance so they couldn't hurt her more. But the shield was also keeping out anything good that might come her way. "Oh, will you help me?" asked quietly. "Of course," Grace said immediately. "But you have to understand, I can't fix your relationship with your parents. Only they can change how they show up for you. What I can help you with is becoming the person you want to be, no matter what they do." Nodded slowly, then looked around at the mess she had made. For the first time, she felt genuine remorse instead of just the empty aftermath of rage. "I should clean this up, shouldn't I?" "I think that would be a good start," Grace said with a warm smile. "How about we do it together?" For the next hour, and Grace cleaned the room side by side. Grace taught how to properly sweep up broken glass, how to organize things systematically instead of just shoving them into drawers, how to take care of her belongings. As they worked, they talked about small things. Grace told stories about her children, about funny moments and hard times, about lessons learned and mistakes made. Found herself laughing at some of the stories, genuinely laughing in a way she couldn't remember doing in a long time. Grace had a way of finding humor and meaning in everyday moments, something the Montgomery family seemed incapable of. Everything in this world was either a crisis or a competition, never just simple and real. When the room was finally clean, felt something unexpected. A sense of the charity gala that evening was held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, one of the most prestigious venues in the city. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, and men in expensive tuxedos mingled with women draped in designer gowns and jewelry worth more than most houses. Arrived with her parents, wearing the pale blue dress her mother had selected, her face carefully made up to look presentable for the cameras. Richard Montgomery placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder as they posed for photographers, a gesture that looked paternal but felt empty too. She had been thinking about her conversation with Grace all afternoon, and now she saw her father's touch for what it was, a performance, something to look good in the photographs that would run in tomorrow's society pages. Smile, darling, whispered through her own perfect smile. The senator is watching. Smiled automatically, a skill she had learned young. But inside, she was noticing things she had never paid attention to before. Her mother's voice was sweet when speaking to important guests, but turned cold and dismissive when talking to the waitstaff. Her father laughed loudly at jokes from wealthy businessmen, but barely acknowledged the volunteers who had organized the event. The whole evening felt like an elaborate show where everyone was playing a part. The Montgomery family, everyone, the master of ceremonies announced from the stage. Their generous donation of $500,000 will help fund the children's hospital expansion we've been working toward. The room erupted in applause. Watched her parents walk to the stage to accept their recognition, waving graciously to the crowd. She had seen this scene play out dozens of times at various charity events. Her parents would donate a large sum, receive public praise, and then spend the rest of the evening networking with other wealthy people who could help their business interests. The actual cause, whether it was sick children, homeless families, or endangered animals, was rarely mentioned beyond the initial announcement. A photographer approached after her parents left the stage. "Miss Montgomery, can I get a photo of you? The young heiress angle always plays well in the papers." Felt a flash of her old anger but remembered Grace's words. This man was just doing his job. He wasn't trying to reduce her to a headline. She smiled politely and posed for the photo, then excused herself and headed toward the back of the ballroom where the service entrance was located. She had noticed something earlier that most of the guests probably hadn't. While everyone was focused on the stage and the speeches, there was a whole other world operating in the background. Waiters carrying trays, volunteers coordinating schedules, kitchen staff preparing food for hundreds of people. These were the people actually making the event happen, but nobody was thanking them or acknowledging their work. Pushed through the door marked "Staff Only" and found herself in a busy corridor. People rushed past carrying supplies, speaking into headsets, checking lists on clipboards. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, almost collided with while carrying a large floral arrangement. "Oh, I'm so sorry," the young woman said, looking panicked. "You shouldn't be back here, miss. This is for staff only." "I know," said. "I just wanted to see how everything works." The young woman looked confused, but also worried she might get in trouble. Okay, but please be careful. It's really busy back here, and we have a lot to do before the dinner service starts." Watched as the woman hurried away. She wandered further down the corridor, observing the organized chaos. In the kitchen, dozens of chefs were plating elegant dishes with precision and speed. In another room, volunteers were assembling gift bags for the guests to take home. Everyone had a purpose, a role to play, and they were all working together to create the perfect evening for the wealthy people in the ballroom. A man's sharp voice cut through the noise. "What do you mean you burned an entire tray of desserts? Do you have any idea how expensive those ingredients were? This is completely unacceptable." Followed the voice and found a chef berating a younger cook who looked close to tears. The young cook was probably around 19 or 20, with flour on his uniform and genuine distress on his face. "I'm sorry, chef. the young man stammered. "The oven temperature was higher than I thought. I'll remake them right away." "You'll remake them with your own money for the ingredients," the chef shouted. "I'm not taking this loss because of your incompetence." Felt her anger rising again, but this time it wasn't selfish anger. It was anger at injustice, at someone with power bullying someone without it. Before she could think better of it, she stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and firm. The chef turned around, his face still red with anger, but his expression changed when he recognized. The Montgomery name carried weight, even in a kitchen. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his tone immediately shifting. "What can I do for you? Is there a problem with the food?" "Yes, there is," said, surprised by her own courage. "The problem is that you're treating your staff badly. Mistakes happen. That's part of learning. Yelling at him and threatening to make him pay for ingredients isn't going to make him a better cook. It's just going to make him afraid to try." The chef's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He clearly wasn't used to being confronted, especially not by a 12-year-old girl. The young cook stared at with a mixture of shock and gratitude. "With all due respect, Miss Montgomery, you don't understand how professional kitchens work," the chef finally said, trying to regain his authority. "Standards must be maintained." "I understand that you have standards," replied. "But I also understand that treating people with respect should be one of them. My family is contributing a lot of money to this event. I'd hate to think that money is supporting people who abuse their staff." It was a bold move, using her family's wealth as leverage, and wasn't entirely sure she had the authority to follow through on her implied threat. But the chef didn't know that. He paled slightly and turned to the young cook. "Just remake the desserts," he said in a much calmer voice. "And be more careful with the oven temperature this time." The young cook nodded quickly, his eyes still wide with surprise. As the chef walked away, the cook looked at with genuine appreciation. Thank you," he said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," said, and she realized it was true. Grace's words echoed in her mind. This was one of those choices, one of those moments where she could decide who she wanted to be. "What's your name?" "Oh," he said, "I'm a culinary student. This is my first big event." "Well, everyone makes mistakes when they're learning," said. "Don't let him make you feel bad for being human." Smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Are you really a Montgomery? I mean, you don't act like I'd expect." Thought about that. I'm trying to figure out who I am beyond just a last name. It's harder than I thought it would be. "I think you're doing pretty well," said sincerely. Returned to the ballroom feeling strange. She had helped someone without wanting anything in return, without throwing a tantrum or making demands. It felt good in a way that getting her way through manipulation never had. Grace had been right. There was strength in choosing to be kind instead of choosing to be angry. The rest of the evening passed slowly. Sat through the dinner, listening to speeches about charitable work that mostly felt like self-congratulation. But she also noticed things she hadn't before. A few of the volunteers who spoke seemed genuinely passionate about helping the children's hospital. One woman talked about how the hospital had saved her son's life, and tears ran down her face as she thanked the donors. That moment felt real in a way the rest of the event didn't. When they finally arrived back at the mansion late that night was exhausted. She changed out of her fancy dress and into comfortable pajamas, expecting to fall asleep immediately. But her mind was too active, replaying the day's events. She thought about her conversation with Grace, about standing up for in the kitchen, about the mother who had cried while thanking people for saving her son. Got out of bed and walked through the quiet mansion. The marble floors were cold under her bare feet. She passed room after room, each one perfectly decorated and rarely used. The house was massive, but it felt empty. Not just because her parents were in their separate wings of the house, but because there was no warmth here, no love, just expensive things sitting in expensive rooms. She found herself standing outside the kitchen, where a light was still on. Through the doorway, she could see Grace cleaning up, preparing things for tomorrow. Watched her for a moment, noticing how Grace hummed softly to herself as she worked, how she moved with calm efficiency, how she seemed at peace even doing mundane tasks. "Couldn't sleep, sweetheart?" Grace asked without turning around, somehow knowing was there. Entered the kitchen and sat at the large island. "How did you know I was there?" "I raised 3 children," Grace said with a smile. "I developed eyes in the back of my head. It's a mother's superpower." "Tell me about them," said. "Your children, what are they like?" Grace's face lit up the way it always did when she talked about her kids. She poured 2 glasses of milk and sat down across from, and for the next hour she shared stories. About her eldest daughter, Maya, who worked as a nurse in the emergency room and came home with stories that were both heartbreaking and inspiring. About her son, David, who was studying engineering and called her every Sunday to tell her about his classes and his dreams of building bridges. About her youngest, Sarah, who taught 2nd grade and sent Grace pictures of her students' artwork. "They sound wonderful," said softly. "You must be really proud." "I am," Grace said, her voice full of emotion. "But it wasn't easy. There were times when I wasn't sure we'd make it. Times when I had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying new shoes for growing feet. Times when I was so tired I cried myself to sleep. But we got through it together." Ihao asked, "How did you get through it?" "Love," Grace said simply. "Real, honest love, not the kind that buys expensive gifts to make up for absence. The kind that shows up every day even when it's hard. The kind that listens and sees and holds space for someone else's feelings. That kind of love doesn't cost money, but it's worth more than all the wealth in the world." Felt tears prickling her eyes. "My parents have all the money in the world, but they don't have that kind of love. Not for me anyway, maybe not even for each other." Grace reached across the counter and took's hand gently. "That's their loss, sweetheart, because you're worth loving. You're smart and brave, and today I watched you start to become someone really special. The way you cleaned your room with me, the way you chose to come to that event even though you didn't want to, those were good choices." "I also stood up for someone," said, and she told Grace about the incident in the kitchen with and the angry chef. Grace's eyes shone with pride. "Now that's the kind of person I hoped you'd choose to be. Not someone who uses their privilege to hurt people, but someone who uses it to help them." "Is that what privilege is?" asked. I've heard the word before, but I never really understood it. Grace thought for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Privilege is like being born on third base in a baseball game. You didn't hit the ball to get there. You just started there because of circumstances you didn't control, like being born into a wealthy family. Now, there's nothing wrong with being on third base. You didn't do anything bad to get there. But the problem comes when people on third base think they hit a triple, when they think they earned their position entirely through their own merit. Absorbed this. So my parents didn't earn everything they have. Your father worked hard, Grace acknowledged. I'm sure he did, but he also started with advantages. Good schools, family connections, money to invest. Those things matter. My son David is brilliant, truly brilliant. But he's also working 3 jobs to pay for his engineering degree because we don't have family money to help him. If he had started with the same advantages your father had, who knows what he could have accomplished. Oh, that doesn't seem fair, said. It isn't, Grace agreed. But here's the thing, you can't change where you started. What you can change is what you do with the advantages you have. You can use them selfishly just to make your own life more comfortable. Or you can use them to help create a fairer world for other people. Like standing up for, said. Exactly like that, Grace confirmed. You have power in situations where others don't. The chef listened to you because of your last name. That's privilege. But you used it to help someone instead of hurt them. That's character. Was quiet for a long moment, thinking about all of this. Grace, can I ask you something personal? Of course, sweetheart. Why do you work here? I mean, my family isn't always nice to you. My mother orders you around. You could probably find a better job somewhere else. Grace smiled sadly. You're right, I could, but I stay for 2 reasons. One is practical. Your family pays well, and that money helps support my children's dreams. But the other reason is you. Me was genuinely surprised. I see myself in you sometimes, Grace said. Not the circumstances, but the feeling. When I was young, I felt invisible too. My parents worked all the time, and I raised myself in a lot of ways. I made some bad choices because I didn't have anyone to guide me. I got pregnant with Maya when I was 17. Her father left, and my parents were so disappointed in me. Couldn't imagine Grace as a struggling teenage mother. How did you survive? I had someone help me, Grace said. An older woman named Mrs. who lived in my apartment building. She took me under her wing, taught me how to care for a baby, helped me finish school. She believed in me when nobody else did. She saw potential in me that I couldn't see in myself. And she told me that someday, when I was able, I should do the same for someone else. So you're doing that for me, said, understanding dawning. I'm trying to, Grace said gently. If you'll let me, I can't replace your parents or give you the family life you deserve. But I can be here for you. I can listen when you need to talk. I can guide you when you're lost. I can believe in you when you doubt yourself. Felt something break open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for so long. The tears came then, real tears that weren't from anger or frustration, but from relief and gratitude. Grace came around the counter and wrapped her arms around, holding her while she cried. It's okay, sweetheart, Grace murmured. Let it out. You've been holding onto so much for so long. Cried for her lonely childhood, for the parents who never really saw her, for the friends who only liked her for her money and status, for the person she had been becoming before Grace showed her another way. And Grace held her through all of it, patient and steady, the way a mother should. When finally stopped crying, she felt lighter somehow. Emptied out, but in a good way, like she had made room for something new to grow. Thank you," whispered. Always, sweetheart, Grace said. Now you should get some sleep. Tomorrow is a new day, and new days are for new choices. Nodded and headed back to her room, but she paused at the kitchen doorway. Grace, will you teach me how to cook sometime? Real cooking, not just ordering food or having chefs make everything. Grace's smile was radiant. I would love that. I would absolutely love that. As climbed the stairs back to her bedroom, she felt different. The mansion W over the following weeks. Transformation continued in small, almost invisible ways. She started waking up earlier to spend time with Grace in the kitchen before school. Together, they made simple breakfasts, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy but made with care and attention. Grace taught her how to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, how to season food properly, how to clean as she cooked so the mess never became overwhelming. Cooking is like life, Grace told her one morning as they flipped pancakes together. If you pay attention and take care of things as you go, it never becomes unmanageable. But if you ignore the small problems, they pile up until you're overwhelmed. Thought about this as she carefully watched the bubbles form on the pancake batter, waiting for the right moment to flip. She had been ignoring problems her whole life, letting her anger and hurt pile up until they exploded. Now she was learning to address feelings as they came, to name them and understand them instead of letting them fester. School became different too. Attended Preston Academy, an exclusive private school where most of the students came from wealthy families. She had always been popular there, but it was a shallow popularity based on her money and status. Girls wanted to be her friend so they could come to her mansion or get invited to exclusive events. Boys showed off trying to impress her. Teachers gave her special treatment because her parents donated generously to the school. Now, seeing everything through her new awareness, started to notice the students who didn't fit that mold. Like a brilliant girl who was at Preston on a scholarship, was always quiet in class, sitting in the back and keeping to herself. The other wealthy students either ignored her or made subtle digs about her being there on charity. One day at lunch, surprised everyone by sitting at table instead of her usual spot with the popular crowd. "Can I sit here?" asked. Looked up from her book, clearly suspicious. Had never spoken to her before and had probably learned to be wary of the wealthy kids who sometimes targeted scholarship students. "It's a free country," said carefully. Sat down and unpacked her lunch, which she had made herself that morning with Grace's help. A simple sandwich, some fruit, and homemade cookies. Several students at nearby tables stared openly, whispering to each other. "Oh, what are you reading?" asked, genuinely curious. He showed her the cover. It was an advanced physics textbook. "I'm studying ahead for next semester. I want to get into MIT, so I need to stay at the top of my class." "Oh, that's impressive," said. "Physics is really hard." It is, agreed, still watching with cautious eyes. But it's also fascinating, understanding how the universe works, the fundamental laws that govern everything. It's like solving the biggest puzzle imaginable. Found herself genuinely interested as talked about quantum mechanics and theoretical physics. Passion for the subject was evident, and she explained complex concepts in ways that made them accessible and exciting. This was so different from the conversations usually had, which revolved around clothes, gossip, and social status. "Why are you really sitting here?" finally asked, setting down her book. "Did someone dare you? Is this some kind of joke?" "No," said honestly. "I'm trying to be a better person, and I realized I've been missing out on knowing interesting people because I was too caught up in superficial things." Studied her for a long moment. That's a surprisingly self-aware statement. "Someone I admire helped me see things differently," explained. "She taught me that how you treat people says more about you than about them." "Must be a wise person," said. "She is," agreed, thinking of Grace. "She's the person I know." Over the following days, and started eating lunch together regularly. Learned that parents had immigrated from China with almost nothing. Her father worked as a janitor at a hospital, and her mother cleaned houses. They saved every penny they could to give opportunities they never had. Scholarship was hard-earned through countless hours of studying, and she carried the weight of her parents' sacrifices with her every day. "Sometimes I feel guilty," admitted one day. "My parents work so hard and I have this amazing opportunity. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail and waste everything they sacrificed for me?" Understood that pressure, though it manifested differently in her life. "Grace told me something that might help. She said we can't control where we start in life, only what we do with the opportunities we're given. You didn't ask for your parents to sacrifice for you, but you can honor their sacrifices by working hard and becoming someone who makes a difference." Smiled. "Your Grace sounds like my mom. She says something similar. She tells me that the best way to repay her is to live a good life and help others when I can." "Oh, that's exactly what Grace would say," said. Their friendship deepened and began to understand what real friendship felt like. Not the transactional relationships she had with the popular girls, where everything was about social status and what you could do for each other. Liked for who she was becoming, not for her money or connections. And appreciated's intelligence, integrity, and work ethic. At home, the relationship with her parents remained strained, but she was learning not to let their emotional distance define her self-worth. One evening, her mother announced that she was hosting a dinner party for some important business associates and their families. I need you to be on your best behavior," said. "The Hendersons are bringing their son Tyler. He's 16 and from a very influential family. Be charming." Recognized this for what it was. Her mother was already thinking about advantageous social connections for her daughter's future. At 12, was too young for serious dating, but was planting seeds for the kind of life she expected her daughter to have. A life that looked perfect from the outside, even if it was empty on the inside. "I'll be polite," said, "but I'm not going to be fake just to impress people." His eyes narrowed. What's gotten into you lately? You've been acting strange." "I've been thinking about who I want to be," said calmly. "And I don't want to be someone who pretends to be something I'm not just to make other people happy." "Don't be ridiculous," snapped. "Social skills are important. Knowing how to present yourself, how to make the right connections. These things matter in life." "So do honesty and integrity," countered. "Grace taught me that." His face flushed with anger. "Grace, you mean the maid? You're taking life advice from the help. That's completely inappropriate. Her place is to clean, not to influence you." "Her place is wherever people show her respect," said, her voice rising. "And she's taught me more about being a good person in a few weeks than you've taught me in 12 years. Slapped her across the face. It wasn't a hard slap, but the shock of it made his eyes water. In all her years of throwing tantrums and breaking things, her mother had never hit her before. The physical sting was nothing compared to the emotional pain of that moment. "You do not speak to me that way," said coldly. "I am your mother. Grace is an employee. You will remember the distinction. And you will attend this dinner party with a smile on your face and perfect manners. Do you understand me?" Touched her cheek, feeling it burn. But instead of exploding into rage like she would have before, she felt a strange calm settle over her. Grace's words echoed in her mind. "Choose who you want to be. Don't let other people's behavior define you." "I understand," said quietly. "I'll be at the dinner party, but I won't pretend to be someone I'm not." She left the room before her mother could respond, walking quickly but not running. She went to her bedroom and closed the door, leaning against it and taking deep breaths. Her cheek still stung, but she didn't cry. She had learned that tears could be powerful when they came from genuine emotion, but she wouldn't give her mother the satisfaction of seeing her broken. There was a soft knock on her door about an hour later. Opened it to find Grace standing there with a cold compress. "Your mother told me what happened," Grace said gently. "I thought you might need this." I took the compress and pressed it against her cheek. The coolness felt good against the lingering heat. "She hit me because I defended you, because I said you taught me more than she ever did." Grace's face showed pain but not surprise. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm sorry. I never wanted to cause problems between you and your mother." "You didn't cause problems," said firmly. "The problems were already there, you just helped me see them clearly. And I'm not sorry for what I said, it's the truth." Grace sat down on his bed and joined her. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Grace spoke. "Your mother and we come from very different worlds," Grace said. "And I think that scares her a little bit. She doesn't understand why you'd value my opinion over hers. In her mind, success looks like wealth and status. Those are the things she was taught to value." "Oh, but they're not the things that matter," said. "Not to you and me," Grace agreed. "But everyone gets to decide what matters to them. Your mother isn't a bad person. She's just trapped in a way of thinking that makes it hard for her to see beyond the surface of things." She hurt me," said quietly. "I know she did," Grace said. "And that wasn't okay. You didn't deserve that, but here's what I want you to understand. People who hurt others are usually hurting themselves. Your mother's anger came from fear. Fear that she's losing control over you, fear that you're rejecting the life she thinks is best for you." Well, that doesn't make it okay, said. No, it doesn't, Grace agreed. I'm not excusing her behavior. I'm just helping you understand it. Because understanding doesn't mean accepting. You can understand where someone's pain comes from and still set boundaries about how they treat you. What kind of boundaries? Asked. Well, for example, you can tell your mother that you love her and want a relationship with her, but that you won't tolerate being hit or disrespected, Grace explained. You can tell her that her opinions matter to you, but so do your own thoughts and feelings. You can be firm about your boundaries while still being respectful. Or will she listen? Asked doubtfully. I don't know, Grace said honestly. Some people aren't ready to hear certain things, but you say them anyway. Not because you expect them to change, but because you need to stand up for yourself, because your voice matters. Thought about this. It was similar to what Grace had said before about not letting other people's behavior define her worth. She couldn't control how her mother responded, but she could control how she responded to her mother. Will you help me figure out what to say? Asked. Of course, Grace said. But first, tell me how you're really feeling right now. Not what you think you should feel, but what you actually feel. It took a moment to search inside herself, something she was getting better at with Grace's guidance. I feel hurt, not just because she hit me, but because she dismissed you like you don't matter. Like your wisdom and kindness mean nothing just because you're not rich. That is hurtful, Grace acknowledged. It's a form of prejudice, judging people's worth by their bank account or social status. I feel angry too, continued. But it's different from how I used to feel angry. Before, I wanted to destroy things. Now I want to fix things. That's growth, Grace said with pride in her voice. That's you becoming the person you want to be. I also feel scared, admitted. What if standing up to her makes everything worse? What if she sends you away? I can't lose you, Grace. You're the only person who really sees me. Grace pulled into a hug, holding her close. Oh, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. Even if your mother did try to let me go, which I don't think she will, we'd find a way to stay connected. You have my phone number. You can always call me or text me. Distance doesn't end real relationships. You promise? Asked, her voice small. I promise, Grace said firmly. You're stuck with me now. I don't give up on people I care about. They spent the next hour talking through what might say to her mother. Grace helped her practice expressing her feelings without attacking, setting boundaries without being disrespectful, standing firm without being aggressive. It was like learning a new language, the language of healthy communication. The dinner party was that Friday evening. Dressed carefully in a modest but elegant dress, did her hair neatly, and practiced her breathing exercises that Grace had taught her for managing anxiety. When she entered the living room where cocktails were being served before dinner, she saw her parents entertaining 3 couples and their teenage children. Tyler Henderson was indeed there, a tall 16-year-old who looked bored and kept checking his phone. His parents were deep in conversation with his father about some business deal. The other families were similarly engaged, everyone playing their roles in the social theater of the wealthy. Her mother's voice was bright and artificial. Come meet our guests. Moved through the room, shaking hands and making polite conversation. She was courteous but genuine, not putting on the overly charming act her mother had demanded. When Tyler tried to impress her by talking about his expensive car and his family's vacation home in the Hamptons, simply nodded politely and asked if he had any interests beyond material possessions. Tyler looked taken aback. "What do you mean?" "Like hobbies, passions, things you care about," explained. I play lacrosse," Tyler said uncertainly, "and I'm into gaming." "What kind of games?" asked, and for the first time that evening, Tyler looked genuinely engaged. He started talking enthusiastically about strategy games and the competitions he participated in online. When he forgot to show off and just talked about something he actually cared about, he became much more interesting. During dinner, sat between Tyler and the daughter of another couple, a girl named Sophie who seemed as uncomfortable with the formal atmosphere as Felt. They started talking quietly and learned that Sophie wanted to be a writer, but her parents were pushing her toward law school. "They don't think writing is a real career," Sophie whispered. "They want me to be practical, but I can't imagine spending my life doing something I don't love just because it makes good money." "Maybe you could do both," suggested. "Study law but write on the side." And after the dinner guests left, cornered in the hallway, her mother's face was tight with controlled anger, though she kept her voice low so the remaining staff couldn't hear. "That was embarrassing," hissed. "You barely engaged with Tyler Henderson. Do you know how important that family is to your father's business? And you spent half the evening talking to Sophie about writing of all things. These events are networking opportunities. You need to understand that." It took a deep breath, remembering everything she and Grace had practiced. "Mom, can we talk? Really talk, not just you telling me what I did wrong." Looked surprised by the calm in his voice. She was clearly expecting another tantrum. "Fine, come to my office." They walked to his home office, a sleek room decorated in minimalist style with expensive art on the walls. Sat behind her massive desk, a power position, but chose to remain standing. She had learned from Grace that body language mattered. "I need to tell you how I'm feeling," began. "And I need you to really listen, not just wait for your turn to talk." His jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. "I know you want what you think is best for me," continued. "But the life you're planning for me feels empty. All these dinner parties, all this networking, all these connections based on money and status instead of genuine relationships. That's not what I want." "You're 12, said. "You don't know what you want." "Please let me finish," said firmly but respectfully. "When you hit me the other day, it hurt, not just physically but emotionally. It told me that you'd rather hurt me than hear me. And I need you to know that's not acceptable. I'm your daughter, not your employee or your social prop." His face flushed. "I lost my temper, but you were being incredibly disrespectful." "I was being honest," corrected. "And there's a difference. I said that Grace has taught me things about being a good person. That's not disrespectful to you, it's just the truth. She has time for me in a way you don't. She listens to me. She sees me as a whole person, not just as an extension of the Montgomery name." "Grace is paid to be here," said coldly. "That's not the same as genuine care." Actually, it makes it more meaningful, said. She could just do her job and collect her paycheck. Instead, she chooses to invest in me, to guide me, to care about who I become. And before you say anything else about her, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to let anyone disrespect her, not even you. Stood up abruptly. You're grounded, 2 weeks. No phone, no computer except for homework, no going out with friends. Okay, said calmly. Blinked, clearly expecting more resistance. Okay, that's all you have to say. You're my mother, so you get to set consequences, said. I don't agree with them, but I'll accept them. But the things I said needed to be said, and I'm not going to apologize for speaking my truth. For the first time in memory, her mother looked uncertain, had always been so confident, so in control. But now she seemed to be grappling with something she didn't know how to handle. When did you get so stubborn? Finally asked. I've always been stubborn, said with a slight smile. I just used to express it by throwing tantrums and breaking things. Grace helped me find a better way. She taught me that strength doesn't come from making others bend to your will. It comes from standing firm in your values while respecting other people's humanity. I sat back down slowly, some of the anger draining from her face. She really has influenced you. In good ways, said. I'm getting better at managing my emotions. I'm making real friends instead of just collecting popular people. I'm thinking about who I want to be instead of just reacting to everything. I've noticed you haven't had a tantrum in weeks, admitted. I thought maybe you were just getting older. It's more than that, said. I'm making different choices, and I need you to understand that those choices include respecting Grace. She's not just the help, Mom. She's a person who has wisdom and experience and a perspective I need. Please don't take that away from me. Was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming on her desk. Your father and we've provided you with everything. The best schools, the best clothes, access to opportunities most children never get. And you're telling me that the maid is more important to you than all of that. It's not about importance, tried to explain. It's about different kinds of value. Material things are nice, and I'm grateful for the opportunities I have. But Grace gives me something you and Dad don't. Presence, attention, guidance. Those things aren't about money, they're about time and care. We're very busy, said defensively. Running a company, managing investments, maintaining our social position. These things require tremendous amounts of work. I know, said, and I'm not asking you to quit your job or change your whole life. I just want you to see me, really see me, not as a future socialite or a networking opportunity, but as your daughter who needs you. His eyes were glistening now, though she blinked rapidly to keep tears from falling. Realized she had never seen her mother cry. I don't know how to be the kind of mother you want, said quietly. My own mother was cold and distant. She taught me that success was everything, that showing emotion was weakness. I've spent my whole life building walls. Then maybe it's time to start taking them down, suggested gently. You don't have to do it all at once, but maybe we could start small, like having breakfast together sometimes. Or you could ask me about my day and actually listen to the answer. Or we could do something together, just the two of us, without it being a social obligation. I can try, said, and for the first time she sounded vulnerable. I can't promise I'll be good at it right away. That's okay, said. Grace taught me that progress matters more than perfection. We can figure it out together. Nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. She stood up and walked around her desk, pulling into an awkward hug. It wasn't a warm, comfortable embrace like Grace's hugs, but it was genuine. Could feel her mother trembling slightly, and she realized how hard this was for her. Showing vulnerability, admitting imperfection, these were things her mother had probably trained herself never to do. I'm sorry I hit you, whispered. That was wrong, regardless of what you said. Thank you, said, and she meant it. The next morning found her mother in the kitchen before her usual time. Was standing awkwardly at the counter, clearly unsure what to do. Grace was there preparing breakfast, and she looked surprised to see. "A good morning, Mrs. Montgomery," Grace said politely. "Can I get you something?" Actually, said, and could hear the effort in her voice, I thought maybe I could have breakfast with my daughter this morning, if that's all right. Grace's face broke into a warm smile. Of course, I'll make enough for both of you. Turned to, is that okay with you? Yes, said, genuinely pleased. I'd like that. They sat at the kitchen island together, something that had never happened before. Usually ate breakfast in her office while reviewing emails. Expected awkward silence, but her mother actually asked questions about school, about her friends, about what she was learning. Grace served them pancakes, the same ones she had taught to make. When took a bite, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "Oh, these are delicious," she said. Helped make them, Grace said. She's become quite a good cook. You cook now? Asked. Grace has been teaching me, explained. It's actually really satisfying, making something with your own hands, seeing ingredients transform into a meal. Looked at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time. I never learned to cook. My mother believed it was beneath us, that we should always have staff to handle such things. It's never too late to learn, Grace said gently. If you'd ever like to join us for a lesson, you'd be welcome. Looked uncomfortable with the idea, but she didn't dismiss it outright. Perhaps, though I'm not sure I'd be any good at it. Nobody's good at first, said. I burned my first batch of pancakes so badly they were like hockey pucks, but Grace was patient with me. Patience is something I'm not known for, admitted with a rueful smile. Another thing you can learn, Grace said warmly. After breakfast, had to leave for work, but she paused at the door. Thank you, Grace, for everything you've done for. I was wrong to dismiss your influence. I can see it's been good for her. Grace inclined her head graciously. She's a wonderful girl, Mrs. Montgomery. You should be proud of her. I am, said, looking at. I'm learning to show it better. The days that followed brought small but meaningful changes. Made an effort to have breakfast with twice a week. Richard's father was still mostly absent due to his demanding travel schedule, but when he was home, noticed her mother speaking to him about spending more time with their daughter. At school's friendship with deepened. They started a study group that met twice a week, and several other students joined them. was surprised to discover she was actually good at helping people understand complex concepts. When struggled with an essay for English class, helped her organize her thoughts and express her arguments more clearly. When couldn't grasp a chemistry problem, explained it in 3 different ways until it clicked. "You're a good teacher," told her one afternoon as they worked on homework together. "Have you ever thought about becoming one?" "Not really," admitted. "My parents expect me to go into business to eventually take over some aspect of their company." "But is that what you want?" asked. Thought about it. A few months ago, she would have said yes without thinking, just accepting the path laid out for her. Now she realized she had no idea what she wanted. She was still discovering who she was beyond the Montgomery name. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think I have time to figure it out." "That's wise," said. "My parents want me to be an engineer, and I probably will be. But I'm also keeping my options open. Maybe I'll discover something I love even more than physics." This friendship with also opened her eyes to the struggles that most people faced daily. One day, came to school visibly upset. When asked what was wrong, explained that her father had hurt his back at work and couldn't work for several weeks. Without his income, the family was struggling to pay bills. "I might have to get a job after school," said miserably. "But if I do that, my grades might slip, and if my grades slip, I could lose my scholarship." Immediately wanted to help. Her first instinct was to offer money. She had access to a generous allowance and could easily cover the family's expenses. But Grace's lessons echoed in her mind. Real help wasn't about throwing money at problems. It was about understanding what people actually needed and respecting their dignity in the process. "Can I think about this?" asked. "I might have an idea, but I need to check something first." That evening, talked to Grace about the situation. Grace listened carefully, then offered her perspective. "This family has pride," Grace said. "They've worked hard to support themselves, and accepting charity might feel like failure to them. Your heart is in the right place, wanting to help, but you need to think about how to help in a way that preserves their dignity." "What would you suggest?" asked. "Well, does have any skills she could offer in exchange for help?" Grace asked. "Could she tutor other students for pay? Could her mother take on extra cleaning work if someone needed it? Sometimes the best help is creating opportunities rather than giving handouts." Thought about this. Is brilliant at math and science. A lot of kids at school struggle with those subjects, and their parents pay for expensive tutors. "There you go," Grace said with a smile. "You could help set up a tutoring service, maybe even help her advertise it at school. That way, she'd be earning money through her own skills, and she could work around her schedule to maintain her grades." The next day proposed the idea too. At first was hesitant. "I've never tutored before," said. "What if I'm not good at it?" "You explained that chemistry concept to me last week better than our teacher did," pointed out. "You have a gift for making complicated things understandable. Plus, you could charge way less than the professional tutors while still making good money. You'd be helping other students while helping your family." His face brightened with hope. That could actually work. Helped create flyers advertising her tutoring services. They listed her subjects, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and biology, along with her impressive GPA and reasonable rates. Helped distribute the flyers and even convinced some of her wealthy classmates to give a chance. Within a week, had 5 regular tutoring clients and was making enough money to help her family through her father's recovery. "Thank you," said emotionally one afternoon. "You didn't just give me money. You helped me find a solution I can sustain myself. That means more than you know." "I learned from Grace," said. "She taught me that real help empowers people rather than creating dependence." Also started noticing other ways she could use her privilege for good. When she learned that the school's library had limited funding and couldn't afford to update their aging computers, she talked to her father about making a donation. But instead of just writing a check, Richard was impressed enough by s initiative to visit the school himself, meet with administrators, and fund not just new computers, but a complete technology upgrade. "I'm proud of you," Richard told after the donation was finalized. "You're learning to think beyond yourself. That's an important quality in a leader." It was one of the first times her father had praised her for something other than appearances or social performance. Realized that by changing herself, she was slowly changing the dynamics of her entire family. Grace watched all of this unfold with quiet pride. She never took credit for growth, but knew that none of it would have been possible without Grace's guidance. The gentle touch that had first calmed her tantrum had grown into a steady influence that was reshaping's entire worldview. One Saturday afternoon, invited to the mansion to study. When arrived and saw the house for the first time, her eyes went wide. "This is where you live?" asked, awestruck by the massive estate. "It's just a house," said, feeling slightly embarrassed by the opulence. "A really big, mostly empty house." They studied in the library and later introduced to Grace. The two of them hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared values of hard work and education. "Your daughter is a nurse?" asked Grace excitedly. "That's what I was 6 months after that transformative afternoon when Grace had first calmed her tantrum, stood in the kitchen helping prepare Thanksgiving dinner. The Montgomery family was hosting for the first time in years, and in an unprecedented move, had agreed to a request to make it less formal and more genuine. "Are you sure about this?" asked nervously as she watched and Grace work side by side, preparing dishes from scratch rather than having everything catered. "What if the food isn't perfect?" "Then it will be imperfect, and that's okay," said, rolling out pie crust with Grace's patient guidance. "Perfect is boring anyway. Homemade is meaningful." Still looked uncertain, but she didn't argue. Over the past months, she had been making genuine efforts to change. She attended school events now, actually listening when talked about her day, and even joined a few of Grace's cooking lessons despite her initial reluctance and numerous burnt attempts at simple dishes. The guest list for Thanksgiving was unconventional by Montgomery standards, and her family were coming, along with Grace's 3 children and several other people who had become important in life. The young cook had defended at the charity gala, was bringing desserts he had made. Sophie, the aspiring writer from the dinner party, was coming with her parents. Even Tyler Henderson and his family had been invited, though Tyler had seemed genuinely pleased to be included in what he called a real Thanksgiving instead of the stuffy affairs his family usually hosted. Richard Montgomery walked into the kitchen, looking bewildered by all the activity. He had been away on business for most of transformation and was still adjusting to the changes he found upon his return. "This is quite different from our usual Thanksgivings," he observed, watching his wife attempt to peel potatoes under Grace's instruction. "Different good or different bad?" asked, looking up from her pie. Richard considered this. "Different interesting," he finally said. "Your mother tells me you've become quite the activist at school, something about starting a mentorship program." Nodded, wiping flour from her hands. "It pairs students from wealthy families with scholarship students. The idea is to break down some of the social barriers and help kids who don't have connections get access to opportunities." Helped me set it up. "Clever," Richard said approvingly. "Building bridges between different communities. That's good business sense and good social sense." "It's not about business," corrected gently. "It's about recognizing that everyone has value regardless of their bank account. Grace taught me that." Richard glanced at Grace, who continued working quietly, letting speak for herself. "Yes, has told me about Grace's influence. I must admit I was skeptical at first, but I can't argue with the results. You're more mature, more thoughtful, more aware of the world around you." "Thank you," said, "but I still have a lot to learn." "We all do," Richard said, surprising her. "Your mother and we've been talking about how we raised you, about our priorities. We're realizing we made some mistakes." This was the most vulnerable had ever heard her father sound. She set down her rolling pin and gave him her full attention. "We gave you everything money could buy," Richard continued. "But we didn't give you enough of ourselves. We were so focused on building an empire that we forgot to build a family. And it took our maid to show us what we were missing." Grace finally spoke up. "With respect, Mr. Montgomery, I didn't show you anything. Did. She had the courage to ask for what she needed and the strength to become who she wanted to be. I just gave her some tools to work with." "Humble as always," Richard said with a slight smile. "But you've had a profound impact on this household, Grace, on all of us." The doorbell rang and rushed to answer it. Stood on the doorstep with her parents, Mr. and Mrs., who looked overwhelmed by the mansion's grandeur. Greeted them warmly, taking their coats and introducing them to her parents. "Mr. and Mrs., thank you so much for coming," said, and could tell her mother was genuinely trying to be welcoming despite her discomfort with the informal gathering. "Has been such a wonderful friend, too. Our daughter speaks very highly of your family," Mrs. said in her accented English. "Especially of Miss and Miss Grace. They have been very kind, too." Over the next hour, more guests arrived. The mansion filled with noise and laughter in a way it never had before. Grace's children were delightful. Maya, the nurse, immediately connected with over medical topics. David, the engineering student, engaged Richard in a fascinating conversation about infrastructure development that actually seemed to shift some of Richard's perspectives on urban planning. Sarah, the teacher, charmed everyone with stories from her classroom, brought an array of stunning desserts that made everyone's eyes widen. Sophie showed up with a short story she had written and nervously asked if anyone wanted to read it. Tyler Henderson, surprisingly, had brought his grandmother, who turned out to be far more interesting than his parents, with stories about growing up during the civil rights era and participating in protests and sit-ins. As they all gathered around the extended dining table, which had been opened to its full length to accommodate everyone, looked around at the diverse group of people. Wealthy and working class, different races and backgrounds, different ages and experiences, all brought together because had learned that human connection mattered more than social status. Stood to give a toast before the meal began. She looked nervous and could see her mother's hands trembling slightly as she raised her glass. "This is not the kind of Thanksgiving I grew up with," began. "In my family, holidays were formal affairs with strict protocols and careful guest lists. But my daughter has taught me something important this year. She's taught me that real wealth isn't measured in money. It's measured in relationships, in kindness, in the positive impact we have on each other's lives." Felt tears prickling her eyes. Her mother had come so far from the cold, status-obsessed woman she had been just months ago. "I want to especially thank Grace Williams," continued, her voice thick with emotion. "When she came to work for our family 3 years ago, I saw her as just another employee. But she saw something in my daughter that I had failed to see: potential, worth. A good heart buried under anger and hurt. She took the time to nurture that goodness, to guide toward becoming someone remarkable. And in doing so, she held up a mirror to my own failings as a mother." Grace looked surprised and moved by words. Around the table, people were listening intently. "I'm not going to pretend I've become a different person overnight," said. "I still struggle with showing emotion, with prioritizing people over business, with breaking the patterns I learned from my own mother. But I'm trying. We're trying." She glanced at Richard, who nodded. "And we're grateful to Grace for showing us a better way." "To Grace," Richard said, raising his glass. "To Grace," everyone echoed, and Grace's eyes filled with tears. After the toast, Grace stood up. "If I may say something," she said softly. Everyone quieted, giving her their attention. "I appreciate the kind words, truly I do," Grace said. "But I need you all to understand something. I didn't transform, she transformed herself. All I did was believe in her when she had stopped believing in herself. I showed her that she had choices, that she didn't have to be defined by her circumstances or her anger. But she's the one who made the hard choices, who did the difficult work of changing." Grace turned to, her eyes warm with pride and love. "When I first met you, you were a child trapped in a cage of privilege and loneliness. You lashed out because you didn't know any other way to be heard. But inside that angry little girl was someone extraordinary waiting to emerge. Someone compassionate, thoughtful, and brave. All I did was give you permission to be that person." Was crying now, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude and love. She stood and walked around the table to hug Grace tightly. "You saved me," whispered into Grace's shoulder. "You saved my whole family." "You saved yourself, sweetheart," Grace whispered back. "I just walked beside you while you figured out how." The dinner was wonderful, filled with laughter and genuine conversation. His father, despite his limited English, told hilarious stories through translation about his early days in America. Tyler's grandmother shared wisdom from decades of activism and social justice work. David engaged everyone in a discussion about sustainable development that was surprisingly fascinating. Sarah had everyone laughing with stories about the creative excuses her second graders came up with for not doing homework. After dinner, as people mingled in the living room, found herself standing by the window looking out at the mansion's grounds. "Your family is different now," observed. "Your mom actually smiles sometimes. Your dad stayed for the whole dinner instead of running off to take business calls. This is nice." "It's still not perfect," admitted. "My parents still work too much. They still sometimes fall back into old patterns, but they're trying, and that matters." "Grace really did change everything," said. "Not just Grace," said thoughtfully. "Grace showed me the way, but I had to choose to walk it. And now I understand something important. Everyone has the power to change if they're willing to do the work. My parents are changing. I'm changing. Even Tyler Henderson is changing. He told me earlier that watching me stand up for at that charity gala made him start thinking about how he uses his privilege." "That's pretty profound for a 12-year-old, teased gently. "I've had a good teacher," said, looking over at Grace, who was deep in conversation with about something that had them both laughing. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, helped Grace clean up the kitchen. It had become their routine, these quiet times together after big events, processing what had happened and talking about life. "You did good today," Grace said as they washed dishes together. "Your mother's toast was beautiful. I never expected that." "She meant it," said. "You changed her too, you know. By changing me, you showed her what was possible. She saw that she didn't have to stay trapped in the patterns she learned from her mother." "That's the thing about change," Grace said. "It ripples outward. One person's transformation touches another person who touches another who touches another. You're creating ripples. Already I can see it. Your mentorship program at school, the way you stood up for, the way you helped find her own solution to her family's problems. These are ripples that will keep spreading." "I want to do more," said. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation when I'm older, something that helps kids from low-income families access opportunities. Education funding, mentorship programs, career guidance, the things that make a real difference." "Oh, that's a beautiful vision," Grace said, "and I believe you'll make it happen." "Will you help me?" asked. "When I start the foundation, will you be part of it? Your perspective, your wisdom, it's exactly what something like that would need." Grace pulled into a hug. "Sweetheart, I'll help you with anything you need for as long as you need me." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and then Grace prepared to leave for the evening. At the door was waiting, which was unusual. Normally, she simply sent Grace off with a brief goodbye if she acknowledged her departure at all. "Grace, wait," said. "I have something for you." She handed Grace an envelope. Grace opened it, and her eyes widened. Inside was a substantial bonus check and a handwritten letter. "I know money isn't the same as respect or recognition," said. But I wanted you to know how much we value you, not just as an employee, but as someone who has become essential to our family. The letter explains that we're increasing your salary and offering full health benefits for you and your family. It's the least we can do." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Montgomery, this is too generous." "It's not generous enough," said firmly. "You gave us our daughter back. You gave us our family back. There's no amount of money that could repay that." After Grace left, found her mother standing in the living room, staring at the family portrait that hung over the fireplace. It was a professional photograph taken 3 years ago, all of them in formal attire, posed stiffly, smiling empty smiles. "We should take a new one," said quietly. "A real family photo. Maybe we could ask Grace to be in it too. She's more family than most of our blood relatives." "I'd like that," said, coming to stand beside her mother. Put her arm around shoulders, and for the first time the gesture felt natural and warm. "I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you needed for so long." "You're becoming her now," said. "That's what matters." Over the following months, the changes in the Montgomery household became more permanent, reduced her working hours, and made a point of being home for dinner several times a week. Richard scheduled his travel around school events and actually attended them, asking interested questions about her projects and activities. The mentorship program started at Preston Academy became wildly successful, with over 50 pairs of students participating. The barriers between wealthy students and scholarship students began to break down. Even convinced her parents to expand the program by offering summer internships at Montgomery Industries for talented students from underprivileged backgrounds. Won a prestigious science competition and received a full scholarship offer from MIT. When she shared the news, threw her a celebration party, inviting everyone who had supported's journey. Grace was there, of course, beaming with pride as if were her own daughter. The young cook used his experience at the charity gala to launch his own catering business, focusing on events that gave back to the community. His family became his first major client, hearing him for a large corporate event and introducing him to their wealthy friends. Sophie's parents, after seeing how passionate she was about writing, agreed to let her pursue it alongside her other studies. She started a creative writing club at school that helped fund and support. The ripples Grace had spoken about continued to spread. Students in the mentorship program went on to create their own service projects, started a free tutoring program for elementary school students in her neighborhood. Tyler Henderson used his family's influence to advocate for more need-based scholarships at Preston Academy. And at the center of it all was no longer the angry, lonely girl throwing tantrums to be noticed. She had become someone who noticed others, who used her privilege to lift people up rather than to set herself apart. She still had moments of frustration and sadness. Change didn't erase the past or fix everything instantly. But she had tools now, ways to process her feelings, people she could talk to, and a sense of purpose that gave her life meaning. On's 13th birthday, instead of the usual elaborate party with hundreds of guests who barely knew her, she had a small gathering with the people who mattered most. Grace and her family, a handful of close friends and her parents, who were both present and engaged for once. They gathered in the kitchen, Grace's domain, and together they made birthday dinner from scratch. Even Richard Montgomery, CEO of a billion-dollar company, found himself chopping vegetables under Grace's patient instruction. "I never thought I'd see the day when my father would willingly cook," said to, watching her dad struggle with an onion. "People can surprise you," said. "6 months ago, I never thought I'd be best friends with Montgomery, or that I'd be eating dinner in this kitchen with your parents treating my parents like equals." "Grace says change ripples outward," said. "I think we're all part of the same ripple." As they sat down to eat the meal they had prepared together, looked around at the faces she loved. Her parents, still imperfect but trying so hard to be better. Grace, whose gentle touch and steady wisdom had started everything. Who had taught her the value of authenticity and hard work. Grace's children, who inspired her with their success despite obstacles. Who had benefited from her learning to use privilege for good. Grace raised her glass of lemonade. "I'd like to make a toast, if I may." Everyone quieted, giving her their attention. "To," Grace said, her voice full of warmth. "A year ago, I met a girl who was hurting so badly that she could only express it through anger. Today, I see a young woman who has learned to transform her pain into purpose, her privilege into power for good, her hurt into healing for others. You have taught everyone in this room about the courage it takes to change, the strength required to be vulnerable, and the wisdom of choosing kindness over cruelty." "To," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Felt overwhelmed with gratitude and love. She stood up, wanting to say something back. "I wouldn't be who I am without all of you," she began, "but especially without Grace. You saw something in me when I couldn't see it in myself. You believed in me when I had given up on myself. You showed me that the gentle touch of someone who truly cares can calm even the worst storms." She looked at Grace with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just calm my tantrums. You calmed the storm inside me. You showed me that I didn't have to be defined by my anger or my loneliness, that I could choose who I wanted to be. And every day I'm still making that choice, to be kind instead of cruel, to be generous instead of selfish, to see people instead of using them." Grace was crying now too, not bothering to hide her tears. "Oh, sweetheart, you did all the hard work yourself." "No," said firmly. "You gave me the tools, you gave me the example, you gave me hope, and that made all the difference." As the evening continued, filled with laughter and stories and the warmth of genuine connection, realized something profound. She had spent 12 years living in a mansion filled with expensive things but empty of love. Now, standing in this same mansion surrounded by people who truly saw her and cared about her, she understood that wealth had nothing to do with money. The real transformation hadn't been about changing her circumstances. It had been about changing herself. About learning that she had the power to choose how she showed up in the world, how she treated others, and who she wanted to become. Grace had started it all with a gentle touch and a patient heart. She had calmed a tantrum, yes, but more importantly, she had shown a hurting child that there was another way to be. That anger didn't have to be the answer. That kindness was its own kind of strength. that everyone had value regardless of their bank account or social status, and had taken those lessons and built a new life from them, a life that mattered, a life that made a difference, a life that honored Grace's wisdom by spreading it to others. As they cleaned up together after the party, moving around the kitchen in comfortable synchronicity, Grace, and side by side as always, felt a deep sense of peace. She wasn't perfect. She would still make mistakes, still have hard days, still struggle sometimes with the old patterns of anger and hurt. But she had something now that she hadn't had before. A foundation built on love and wisdom and genuine human connection. A purpose that went beyond herself. A family, not just of blood but of choice, who saw her and valued her for who she truly was. The billionaire's daughter had everything money could buy. But it was the gentle touch of the black maid, her patient guidance and steady love, that had given what she really needed. Purpose, direction, hope, and the understanding that the most valuable things in life can't be purchased. They can only be earned through the hard work of becoming a better person, one choice at a time. Grace had shown her the way, and would spend the rest of her life walking that path, helping others find their own way, creating ripples of positive change that would spread far beyond the walls of the Montgomery mansion. The gentle touch that had calmed a tantrum had transformed a life, and that transformed life would go on to transform many more. That was Grace's true legacy. Not just the changes she made in one girl, but the changes that girl would make in the world because of her. And it all started with a simple act of kindness, a gentle touch, and the belief that even the angriest child could learn to choose love over rage, connection over isolation, and purpose over privilege. That was the power of one person who truly cared. That was the power of Grace to do before I fell in love with physics. I loved the idea of helping people through science. Grace's face lit up. Maya would love to meet you. She's always saying we need more women in STEM fields. Maybe you two could talk sometime. I'd love that, said sincerely. Then once you've established yourself as a writer, you could transition to doing that full-time. Sophie's eyes lit up. That's actually a good idea. I never thought about it that way. Still cold and empty, her parents were still distant and self-absorbed. Nothing about her circumstances had actually changed. But something inside her had shifted. She had started to see the world differently, to understand that she had choices in how she responded to her life. Pride, even. She had done this herself, with Grace's guidance, and the room looked better than it had before the tantrum.